if anyone wants to sell it, they buy it from me, which has been really great. And as a side note, with respect to publishing and books, I would say, it's really hard to make a living as a published author. The only way I'm making more money on the second edition of my book that I produced and paid for myself, and I own the title to, than I did in the other 3 titles combined in the last 12 years since the first one was published. So, and my books have sold now over 10,000 copies, which sounds like a lot, but in terms of how that translates into income and royalties, one way or another they get you. So self-publishing is good if you've got the capital to do it, but it's expensive, obviously, for hardcover books. But anyway, so I've been here for 21 years, and from the wedding business that was like important for cash flow and to keep the business going. Once my first book was published in 2007, then I started to transition more into trying to create very interlocking sources of revenue based on the published work that I had. So then I started to do greeting cards, and I produce about 85 different greeting cards that I wholesale. I then had 3 titles of books. I do art shows, so I can buy my books from my publishers, and I own the one myself now, but I can buy books like a bookstore, stand in my booth and sign books and sell them, and I sell fine art. I'm up to about, in the last 10 years, somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000 in art sales. So that's been great. And I sell to institutions as well as individually. And I continue to, work on publishing, but that's not. I don't license a lot of work anymore. There's too much work out there. So my primary focus is on fine art, high-end fine art, my books, and the cash flow business, like the greeting cards. I do 6 art shows a year. I do a lot of corporate work. That's always very strong for me. I do real estate photography. I do a lot of work with BMC. That's a big client of mine. And I do some tabletop and other assignments just that come along from contractors, builders, architectural related stuff, and whatever anyone throws my way. So that's where I am today. Primarily, I would say 85% of my life comes from income I generate from photography. I do have a part-time job. I'm not afraid to admit that to anybody. I work at a great store, a wine store in Great Barrington called Domaines. I love wine. I collect it. So that helps me do that. It helps me pay my mortgage, and it helps me keep cash flow free in my business to be able to plow it back and do the things I want to do and travel, which I do a lot of. So it works very well, and it's a decent little living. It's very rare that someone gets rich from photography. But that's my story. I'm honored always to be a guest of yours and to hopefully help bring some guidance, some good ideas, some refreshing sort of thought processes to what you may want to apply in your photographic work and process, and hopefully stimulate you to think a little bit differently, to consider an assignment in some different ways, or certainly to encourage you always to think outside the box. I'm not a guy for rules. I hate the rule of thirds. I never use it. I don't like. I'm lefty, so there were always like things that were thrown at me, like you have to go from. We read from left to right, so your motion, your vanishing points have to go from left to right. So I do it to right to left a lot because I like it, and that's how I see the world. I think the most important rule about photography really for me is you have to photograph what you want to photograph, subject matter that's of interest to you, the way you see it, the way it comes to you visually from the big world we look at. That little spot right there that I just saw, I'm going to photograph that, and I'm going to photograph it the way I saw it because that's what caught my eye. That's what gained my attention, right? Don't try to do it, see it, and then do it according to someone else's set of rules about how you have to do it, because it's going to start to mess with your own creative process. So let your own process flow. Let your own vision be the driver of how you use your camera. So do we want to, is it going to be all right with the lights out? Or okay, because I think that's going to be a little bit better. So we have symmetry and reflections on this one, and for any type. There we go. For any type of work that you do, any type of assignment, a photographer has to work with the reality, like I was kind of just suggesting, of the setting and the environment that he or she is in. When I first thought about symmetry and reflections here in the Berkshires, the first place I would run to, or I thought I would run to, for an assignment like this would be the nearest body of water, and of course of which we have many. So a lot of the subject matter choices will be pretty obvious, like something like this, just boats in a harbor, the mast, the reflection, everything's nice and even. What I liked about this one, this is down in row 8 in Connecticut, by the way, but what I liked about it was that the boats were all kind of enclosed in the reflection of the shoreline and the foliage on the shoreline, which just gave it a nice sort of definition to that line of subject matter, and I do believe that it is the reflection that draws you to the image in the first place. It just the symmetry and the reflection that makes it a visually interesting image, and that's what your eye obviously is first drawn to. So that can be a pretty obvious choice, right? Just boats on the water, boat hulls. Sometimes they're very popular, and I'll get into that in a second. But this is a bigger picture shot of that type of subject matter. And I think a lot of these, like I said, can be effective and appealing images. And I'm sure that I don't need to tell you guys, but please do always take advantage of the extremes of the golden light hours. So the very early morning hours before and right after sunrise, and then at and even after dusk, when you have the best opportunity for, especially on water, minimal breezes, minimal agitation of the surface. So you do get a very clear reflection in a situation like this where the water is very still. This is up in Nova Scotia and Cape Breton Island years ago. I was out, kind of looking around for images late at night, and I came across this harbor. And I've always liked the image, never done anything with it, this is probably the first time anyone's ever seen it. But I liked it, and there was enough dusk, twilight color in the sky to be able to still get some light in the sky. So just another example of everything doesn't have to be in daylight. You can do nighttime shots that can be very cool on still water with a reflection. So just always reminding you about golden light hours. Protected bodies of water, obviously like harbors in the last shot, are great because they ensure relatively still water. Fishing boats, as I mentioned a moment ago, and sailboats are iconic. They're always worth trying to capture. This probably is a little bit less because the water is agitated and the reflections are a little blurred, but within the context of the direction I got for the project where it said the symmetry and the reflection doesn't have to be perfect, I thought this is still something that works because there's a really nice flow of reflection going back into that sort of vanishing point way back there. And it's even, the little fishing hut on the end, the two fishing huts are nicely reflected. So that's material that I always look for when I'm out traveling different places. This is Martha's Vineyard, as probably a lot of you recognize. That's Vineyard Haven. And when I've spoken to different groups of photographers in the past here at the club, and also when I teach privately, which I do quite frequently, one-on-one, people come to my shows and they'll see my work and ask, can you show me what you're doing when you do that? I always encourage people to let the technology of digital photography be their friend. And by that, there are a lot of aspects of that, but by that, primarily what I mean is let the immediacy of the result that you get on the screen be a tool to guide you to the best image that you can create in any given situation. We used to have to wait for film. We could change our perspective. We could do this, but we'd wait 2 weeks to get our slides back, or even 5 hours to rush to the 1 hour photo and get your prints back. Now you've got it right in front of you. I always encourage people to do a quick like zoom in and a perimeter check all around the perimeter of the image to make sure there's nothing creeping in the perimeter. Our tendency, because you have your focusing spots here, you've got your bracket, and your bracket and the whole thing that's ever been set up in photography through the lens is to focus on this area of the image, and it's natural. It's what we do anyway. Even if we're not a photographer, when we look at an image, we're generally going to be looking into the center of it. But the periphery is just as important, right? And one thing that I always try and do is compose to the full frame and not tell myself, well, I can crop that later, right? I want the full frame to be the full image. That works against me sometimes, but I found that to be really important because I'm really respecting the integrity of the whole image. And my composition has to be complete. It can't just be partial, and I'll get away with it. So I like to really encourage people to compose a full image and be very conscious of the perimeter at all times. So you can take a shot. You can look at the preview. You can get a sense of what's right, what's wrong, what you like, what you don't like. You can make an adjustment. You can shoot again, etc. You can until you get to where you want to get. So this is a similar situation. This was in a town called Santa Margherita in Italy a couple years ago, and I like these boat hulls. Nothing really special or unique about the thought process here, right? I mean, you've seen a lot of reflection shots of boat hulls, but I started pretty much standing or maybe kneeling on my knee on the dock. And the first thing I didn't like was there was a lot of highlight up here, and there was too much detail, too much stuff going on there that I didn't want in the shot. So I took a lower vantage point and started to cut the upper area out. And then I was also concerned about this net retriever, which is basically the hardware on the third boat. So I could not eliminate that, but I wanted to get it further up in the frame. And so I went to there, and it was starting to look more like what I wanted. It was more focused on it was a little bit further zoomed in and more focused just on the three hulls. And then I got to this one where I lowered it back down a little bit because I wanted this a little bit lower and out of the center. And I came to this final image. Not a spectacular image by any means. Yep.
Quick question. What do you use for a standard lens?
So that's something that I really struggled with for a long time because I had a Nikon D3. And I had a set of three lenses, basically from a super wide, a 14 to 24, a 28 to 70, and an 80 to 200. Had a little gap here or there, but it didn't really make a difference. But what started to really bother me was that every time I changed lenses on that camera, I was introducing dust into the chamber. I was getting these, especially in skies, I was getting all that spotting, and it was just driving me crazy. I would go down. I had to take a whole day, drive to Nikon's facility on Long Island, and make an appointment to get them to clean my sensor. And they cleaned the sensor, and within 2 weeks, it'd be right back in the same situation. I got all this spotting. So it drove me nuts. So that camera, I started to say, okay, I'm going to just use that for my corporate work and for any situation in which I don't have to worry about a lot of that spotting appearing because of the type of backgrounds or type of work I'm doing. So I got a new body, and with that body, I got the Nikon 24 to 120, which is a fixed maximum aperture, and I keep it on all the time. So I never have to worry about dust, as far as I know. And I've never had to really say. I used to sit there for hours spot toning images where you had a lot of clouds and a lot of sky, and there were dots everywhere, and just drove me crazy. So that's what I do mostly all my this type of work with now is the 24 to 120. So I can't really go long, but I'm not a nature photographer. I'm not out looking for birds, and I'm more of a landscape guy. So 24 is more than adequately wide without getting any bending and distortion and the barrel distortion. So it's great. It's good for architectural because your ideal is 24 to 28 in terms of the really wide, and I got enough zoom. I can do portraits, etc. So that's what I work with.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Let's see. Sorry, I lost my place. So I went through those guys, and I ran ahead. So you can make some pretty striking landscapes, obviously, using reflections. So I do that a lot in all seasons. This was a project I was doing with a client who started out as a sort of a field student with me, and then got involved in doing a book that's going to be published very soon, which is really cool, a farm-to-table cookbook. So we were out at all these farms. This is Holiday Brook Farm, which is owned by Dick and Crane out on Route 8 in Dalton. And they have a pond beyond the farm sort of administrative building between there and the house. And we saw that when we were doing the photography for the book. And we took a couple portraits of them across the way. And I said to my friend and client, we should come back at sunrise because this will be really, really cool. We have to kind of get the right timing. And we asked them if they could cut the field. But we got the lifting mist this morning. And then we just started playing. There's a shot I don't have tonight that's a little bit more to the right, and it incorporates those two kind of parallel trees in the middle, and it has rays of light coming through. That's a big fine art print that I produce and sell. But this was one of this whole series of shots. And again, one of the process things that I really try and encourage people to do is move, keep looking, keep changing, work your perspective, work your vantage point, work your high, your low, and keep experimenting with what you've got, because you have a limited time of really good light, right? You can make all these shots, and they can look like, this is obviously because you saw the last shot, you can kind of see that it's the same space, the same place, but you can create 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 different images from the same space that look like they were taken in different places if you work it really well. And so here again, the reflection is there. It's kind of clouded by the mist, but it's the reflection that makes the image for me. And you don't have to agree with that, but it is the most important element of the shot. If there were no reflection there, if this was just a body of grass or a field, it wouldn't be nearly as interesting or striking an image. Then there are situations. This is golden light hour. Let's see. Sorry, I'm going off script a lot. But this next set of images was taken in Kent, Connecticut, right at sunrise. This is the stretch between Kent and Bulls Bridge, and it's very beautiful. It was my favorite part of the Housatonic River landscape. And these are going to be, you'll see, 3 completely different images, but these were all taken from within 5 feet of each other. So you can, there's just, without having to even move, you look across the river, right? You look down the river to the right, totally different, but really cool. It just had this natural, like, this is not a reflection here, right? But this foreground foliage is kind of imaging and mirroring the bough of the tree coming out there. So it created the illusion of a reflection that was incorporated in the other bigger reflection of the other bank of the river. In the same way, in this shot, this is foreground, but it kind of has a mirroring effect. So this is not a real reflection, but it created the illusion of a reflection, as did this foliage down here, creating this nice arcing window here to look through that was split pretty much right there with the dividing line of the image and the shoreline that off of which you get the real reflection here and here. But you get the sense that there's a continuity of the shaping and the mirroring of those shapes of the foliage that creates the illusion that that's part of the symmetry in the reflection, when it's not. But anyway, that's just 3 different shots, 3 different totally different looking images from the exact same place on the same day.
Your shots are all tripod, correct?
Yes, this is all on a tripod. So, and I'm not always using a tripod, but I advocate always using a tripod. I mean, there's just sometimes when, especially if you're in a city, in a foreign country, you just don't always want to be exposed that way. I got attacked once with a guy with a knife, and big butcher knife. So I've learned to be a little bit less sort of trusting of the environment. But yeah, I mean, if I'm out in the landscape, it's on my tripod. Yeah, and of course, because you're probably down to I'm setting it at ISO equivalent of like 50, so I'm shooting it below 1/8 of a second, and with really small aperture, great depth of field. So I have to have it on tripod, absolutely. And even if it's not at slow shutter speeds, why not? If you can, always use a tripod. So the vertical we talked about with the sort of the real symmetry, and then the illusion of symmetry that you can create by how you frame the image and use the elements that are there that can be effectively sort of effectively utilized. So then you should always work in all seasons. Winter is a spectacular time of year. And I go out and do a lot of my landscape work in the winter because I'm less busy and I'm here more of the time.
Cold.
It's cold, but it's beautiful. I mean, when you get that, and these days, just like with fall foliage, I don't know if you guys are seeing it, but it just seems like it's much less reliable that we get beautiful fall foliage every year now, and we maybe get a really great peak foliage once every 3 or 4 years. Winter's the same way. It seems like we get fewer and fewer days where we have that beautiful soft kind of snow that creates the frosting, and you don't get wind that kicks up as soon as the sun rises and blows it all off. So you have to be really nimble. You have to be really responsive to the conditions you have and get out really early, get set up. But when you get it and you get there's so much light, there's so many gradations of the gold and that's just gilding those boughs, and it's coming down here, and the blue that's in the sky and in the color of the light in the early morning is there. And I just and even like when you get this kind of textural stuff, with lightly kind of very thinly frozen surface water, it can look really cool when it goes from a very literal and very clean reflection here into this sort of more muddied reflection that's coming off of that texture. I really like it. But get out there in all seasons and do it. This is right down the road. This was actually an October snowstorm that hit Great Barrington in 2011. It was the one that took all the trees down on Main Street and really prompted the Main Street reconstruction project. You can see if you look closely here, you can see a little bit of fall color out there, and this tree still had red leaves on it. So it gave this really neat little accent of color that otherwise wouldn't have been there in the dead of winter. But again, I don't know, this one has been a successful picture. I've sold it a lot because people really identify with that beautiful, the stillness and the beautiful sort of fleeting nature of that frosted look that you get far less frequently these days.
Where is it? Where was that?
That's Simon's Rock Pond in Great Barrington. The Simon's Rock College, which is over the hill going towards Alford. Beautiful spot. Doesn't always look that pretty, but that particular morning it was just gorgeous, So reflections also can be effective. I mentioned earlier I do a lot of architectural photography. This was taken when I was doing my Barnes book. And so for architectural, capturing barns in New England, I think a photograph, if I had chosen to go over to here and just photograph the barn, I might have gotten a nice picture of the barn, but the reflection really makes the image for me. It adds a whole other dimension to the beauty of the of the barn in its landscape, in its place, and it just sets it off. So that was something I wanted to photograph this barn, and I had been photographing it from the other side and inside the buildings. But as I had approached it on the road, I had seen this little pond, and I thought, I got to go out there later on, and you can see the long shadows. So this is late afternoon, and get it from the pond, because that's going to be a really nice reflection. And it's in the book, and I love that shot. So then, of course, you can shoot, reflections off of bridges in places like Amsterdam. Again, not a perfect reflection, which again is consistent with the direction of the assignment. But I love this dripping, weeping, almost like wisteria or a weeping willow kind of effect of the reflection on the slightly agitated water. For this image, this was as close as I could get to being dead, even with the face of the bridge, but I was slightly askew. But I wanted to have the bridge in the background with its own arches in there. I wanted to try to, pardon?
The street lights.
Yeah, the street lights, right, where I very deliberately did not compose it, so I would maybe cut this one out but include that one. I wanted them to be, in their own way, mirror images, and then they're reflected there. And I think that's an important component, because it really does create a nice bracket for the bridge. So, and the bridge obviously is almost center. Your cut line to the reflection is almost in the middle of the image. So it's a little bit more of a traditional way of taking a reflection image. So then work it, right? Work around. Your eye is going to go right to that reflection, right? That's the same bridge, but why not have the reflection offset? Throw the rules out the book, and incorporate the architectural and the beautiful features of the city that this bridge exists within in the image. And you're not detracting from the reflection itself, but you're inviting the viewer to see something else that brings context to that bridge and a sense of place to it. This is an image where, very similar, I moved slightly to my left. I incorporated more, so from that last one, where you have a little bit, you barely see the right bank on the river. I wanted to kind of look down the canal in that sense and incorporate more of the right bank. And I was also getting cars coming across, so I wanted to get the car, this is obviously about a 15-second exposure. I wanted to get the lights of the car streaking through the image to create a slightly off-balance element that was, an interesting feature for the viewer of the image. And I sat there for, I don't know, God, it was like, that night I was out for 2.5 hours taking pictures of bridges all over the place and waiting for cars to come across. And sometimes I wouldn't time it right, or someone would be here and the car would get halfway across the bridge and the shutter would close. So I had to do it again, So you never know what you're going to get, but if you keep working, keep trying, you'll get something that I think is pretty cool in the end. And it has that element of that reflection that is the initial sort of eye-attracting element of the image, but then it opens up this whole other world to you. And I want you guys to comment on that. Do you like that, or do you not like that? Do you think that's a legitimate way of approaching the assignment? I do. You may not, but consider it, because I think it can work. So,
we have a question.
Yeah.
Well, I was curious about the vibrant purple sky.
Yep.
Did post-processing?
No, that's so. I have this whole series of images that I produced this year, and it was a museum exhibition called Blue Light. So, and in that, I learned a lot about the property of light through that project. I think you're seeing a little bit of a color palette distortion on the screen because that's really more blue than it is purple in the image.
Okay.
But the blue, right? The naturally occurring blue light that we see is because blue light waves are very slow. So when you see water appearing blue, or when they're out in space and they look down on the ocean on the planet and they call it the blue planet, it's because the last light to be absorbed in water is blue light. Red light waves pass through. Otherwise, if red was slow moving light wave, the planet would appear red. But because the blue light is the last to be absorbed into the water, when someone is looking at the planet from afar, you see it as blue. Similarly, blue light passes slowly through the atmosphere. So at dusk, right, when you do those post-sunset shots, and usually you want to wait maybe 10 or 15 minutes so the red and the orange and all that comes out of the sky, the last color of light that you're going to get in the sky, we perceive it as black, but there's actually blue light waves in the sky and still that you can capture. That's why all those dusk shots, those really great dusk shots, have blue skies. And pre-dawn, I've got an image I took in Italy at Lago Maggiore at 4 o'clock in the morning, and the sky is almost this color, this purple. It's like insane, that it's 4 in the morning and you've got that kind of color. It was a long exposure. You have to go 20 seconds, 30 seconds, but the longer you expose it, the longer that light is going to be captured on the sensor of your camera or even in film. So that's a natural occurring light. There's nothing doctored about it. There's a color shift here, but if you imagine that that's actually more deep, dark blue, midnight bluish, that's what that actual color is. I've changed nothing. The only thing I do on these images sometimes, I do very little post-processing. I want to represent what my camera captured, what I saw, or what I knew the camera was capable of capturing on a night like this when I know there's blue light in the sky. I can't see it visually, and we can't see it, but it's there. If you expose long enough, you're going to get it. So it might have been a much darker, blacker sky to me, my visual perception of it, but the blue was there. So I take these long exposures, and all I'm going to do sometimes is maybe I've got a little bit darker quality here and here. So I might take this band here and just lighten up the shadows. Just like if I was in a dark room, I was Ansel Adams burning and dodging an image, right? I don't want to do anything more than I could do manually in a dark room with paper and film, right? Otherwise, I want the image to stand for what it is that I saw, worked on, captured. I want to change the reality at all. So that's the blue there. You can actually, if I could, let me try to turn this around because you can see how it looks. How it looks here. It's much more blue, right? Yeah. So that's just a color shift with the
on the screen.
Yeah. It was a really beautiful. I'm bummed that you can't see it because what I'm looking at, this blue, it was beautiful, really striking, and it's rich. It's just rich and saturated. But you're only going to get that with a long exposure. So I think there's one more. Yeah. So then, and this guy, it's not purple. It's blue. More of a navy blue. And anyone feel free to come around and take a look at it, or I'll open this up to you afterwards. But again, this is a different street corner, different bridge. But I really liked the multiple kind of hoops and the fact that these were round and this was more oval. And I think it's definitely the reflection that initially captures your eye. But then there are all those other elements that are sort of iconic of Amsterdam, the style of architecture, the bicycles along the bridge, that really make the reflection be a part of an introduction to a scene that speaks to a place.
One star in the sky?
Pardon?
Is that one star?
Yeah, one star. Yeah. It was still early enough. Yeah.
that same phenomenon happens with northern lights too. You can't necessarily see the depth of the color until you do a long exposure.
Yes.
And then it brings out much more of the greens and the purples.
Right, and what the long exposure will capture is the progression of the changing of the hues and the colors of the light. What we perceive is only what is actually happening in that any given instant, right? So we can't record intellectually the progression of light, but a long exposure will record much more light because the light's changing through that exposure time. So and I don't know if anyone been to Amsterdam. That's a great place, man. It's hard not to want to take pictures in Amsterdam. It's a beautiful city. So I abandoned my wife for a couple hours that night and said, I'll be back. I gotta get some shots, man. I'm writing this trip off. I gotta justify it. There are a lot of, in a place like Amsterdam, there are a lot of opportunities, and I didn't know the city. I've been there a few times, but didn't know it well enough. Hadn't explored it.
Oh, what's that? I get my attention.
Hadn't explored it photographically before, so this was like a first time thing for me, But I wanted to shoot what I could shoot in any given scene with any given bridge and move, find another one, keep finding more before the light's gone, before it's too late, and I really highly encourage that kind of sort of exploratory inquisitiveness. Keep looking, keep searching, and I never go somewhere where I've seen pictures taken before. I might wind up in the same place because it's an iconic place. I didn't know that. But when I go somewhere and I photograph it, I try to photograph it in a completely different way than anyone's ever photographed it before. Different angles of view, different ways of treating the subject matter. Don't do what 500 other people have done, over the last 10 years and take the exact same shot or try to get your own stuff. It goes back to what I said before about throwing other rules out and letting your own relationship with the environment be the driving force between how you represent it and photograph it. So let's see. And what I've sort of touched on a few times is, remember here, as you go out now and approach this assignment, that the wording of the assignment is that the symmetry does not need to be perfect. So where you have those kind of drippy reflections, it's okay, right? It's still a reflection. It's still a representation of what is the reality on the other side. It doesn't need to be the entire photo. That's why when I read that, I started to include these images that the reflection is an essential component of the image, but it's okay to introduce other material, other information with that reflection. And the reflection is gonna relate to that other material, but it's gonna be a focal point and an accentuation point for where you are and what you're capturing. But the eye should be drawn into the composition because of the symmetry. And again, I invite anyone to tell me, I didn't really see that in that image. I hope you do. I believe that they are effective that way, but you could see it differently. That's fine. It should be a crucial element. The symmetry, by the way, needs to be caused by reflections. So that's what I wanted to give you a whole host of images out of my archives from different places, different situations, different approaches. Some more literal, some more clean and perfect, some that take into the spirit of the assignment, the wording of the assignment. So let me go forward. This was, so to that last point, this is a little bit more literal. It's a little bit more straight on, a little bit more clear cut. You can see the reflection. The interesting thing is that you've got these lights are reflected here. There are other lights from these other sort of bridges going back down that create this reflection, but you don't see the source of them as much. But I really like this image because and you've got the lights. This is obviously 25 seconds or something. Lights of the traffic going across here, the banding lights. there's a real dynamism to this image, a real dynamic feel to it. It's got energy, and it's and you got what I really like too is you got these flapping flags here that are blurred, but you also have the blurry reflection of them down there, which is kind of cool. So it's fun doing this stuff, because you really get into you start to like. This was like 2 hours after I started that night, and I came across this bridge. And I thought, that's really cool. I like that one, So more literal, but just as interesting, I think. So think about the surfaces that you can utilize. Water is one of them. Obviously, most of this has concentrated on water. But there's no reason why a polished stone surface can't be the source of an interesting photograph of a reflection. Now, there's a reflection within a reflection here, right? Because you have this bigger landscape reflection, but you also have the POW flag reflected in the bottom corner. And that's why I cropped it that way. If I had tried to shift so that I was getting the tree more of a complete reflection of the tree, I would have cut off the flag. So I didn't want to do that. I wanted the flag to be an essential sort of visual and meaningful component of the image, and I want its reflection to be there because that's where the names are on the wall, not on the flag. I took this 20 years ago on a trip to DC. I was on my bike riding all around DC, taking pictures. This was sunrise, obviously, and I don't know if anyone likes it particularly, but I really like it. It's different. I've never seen a shot from DC or the memorials that's like it. And again, it never got anywhere. No one ever looked at it, published it, but it's always been in my archives, and I like it. Now here is a different interpretation of this theme, right? There is no line here anywhere where there's a reflection, but you have like thousands of reflections in this image. And all this is, I'm in Venice. I'm in a bar on top of a building. This is on the island of Giudecca, and there's a church out there. And this was just one of those like dry pads, rubber pads with a bunch of bar glasses. So I was sitting at the bar, and I just zoomed right into this area. I wanted a symmetry, so there's symmetry here going out. But you have all these reflections on the edges of the glasses. All of this is a reflection. This is a reflection. That. All of these lines in here, for the most part, are reflection. These are all reflections of the bottoms of the glasses from a perspective standpoint, reflecting as they recede down in your viewpoint. This is all this bottom reflected here. So there are like multiple reflections, right? In that shot. And I don't know, does anyone like that shot?
I do.
Yeah.
I think it's really cool, right?
No one's ever going to paint that.
No. But think outside the box, right? And I think that would work for this. Something like that would work for this theme. But it's like outside of your normal way of approaching it. So, it's not like you can find scenes like that all the time, but if you come across something like that, keep your mind and your process open so that you could respond to something like that and get something really cool. Why not use the sheet metal on the top of a car, right, to get a reflection? So this is a parked car right outside the Mahawi, and I was walking right by. I actually I did a lot of house photography for them, so I was actually going in to shoot a show. And I saw this. It was a white car. I saw this. I was like, wow, that's really cool, man. And I used to get shots from behind me to the left. The tour buses would park. And so the tour buses, the side of the bus would be this big sheet metal side, and I could get reflections, more vertical type reflections of the side of the marquee from the side. And I have a whole bunch of those types of shots. But this one, I don't think anyone's ever taken a shot like that of the Mahawi, let alone any other theater that I know. So, just be exploratory, be creative, keep looking, nothing is out of bounds, in terms of what you can use to create that reflection or what reflection might be suitable for something like an assignment like this. And then just finish up right back to, and this is again, you can see on here it's blue, but this is probably the most literal of all, right? Cut right through the middle, a perfect reflection. Took me 7 days to get this shot, going to the same spot. I set my tripod up. I marked the three legs in the ground. I recorded the focal length and the exposure time, and I had different conditions. Sometimes I had clouds in the sky. One day I had a lot of birds. There were a lot of bugs. Birds were coming down and hitting the water, creating ripples and stuff. 7th day, it was beautiful. The sun came up at 9 o'clock to me. It rose. It started hit the tops of the trees, started moving down. As soon as it got down to shoreline, the level of the sunshine, I started clicking, and I don't know, this is like the 10th shot. But this is one of the most successful pictures I've ever produced. It's been licensed. I sell prints every year of different sizes of this image. People, I can show you here on the screen, people, they look at it and they're like, oh, is it like that?
Yeah.
Whoop, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oops, I don't know what I just did. Sorry. But they start, because it's a greeting card. So they grab a greeting card, they turn it like they don't know. I want to get it back. Shoot.
I think you still had it. Okay, on the taskbar on the bottom.
Yeah.
Your window is that very. Yep.
Okay.
Right there. Yep. Just click on it left.
Okay. Let me go for. So they keep looking at it and turn it upside down and around, and they don't know, like, is the top part the real part? Is the bottom part the real reflection? And it's great because I like stand in my booth and I watch people from a distance and they're going, well, I don't know what is it supposed to be.
Reflection and which is the
But that works too. Just a straight, perfectly mid-split reflection, I think, can be a great shot.
How many seconds?
Pardon?
How many seconds?
Oh, this image wasn't too long an image. Probably somewhere between, I would say, a 1/6 and a 15th of a second. I didn't want a long exposure because that I could have things getting into the image, birds flying or whatever. I needed to have a fairly quick exposure. So this was set. I took a whole bunch on medium format. This is from a 35 millimeter slide. So I was on Fuji Velvia film. I was set to 40 ISO. I was set. I didn't need a lot of depth of field because my foreground, the closest subject matter was probably 100 feet away. So I probably was set at f8, and so I was able to push the shutter speed a little bit. So it's probably a 30th or a 40th of a second. Can't remember. I mean, it's 20 years ago.
Wow.
But somewhere in that type of exposure math is what it was. It was not a long exposure. The sky is blue, as you can see, because I have this conversation with a lot of people. When that's real, that's not manipulated. When just like with the polarizer, right? They always tell you with a polarizer you want to be shooting at 90 degrees to the sun. You get maximum polarization. Well, that's because the best color of light is at 90 degrees. So this is early in the morning. The sun is directly to my left. This is high up, high elevation in like a mountain lake here. So I'm not at sea level. I'm not at ground level. I'm up. So I'm looking. This is like more upper atmosphere. It's not street level ground viewing of the sky. If you look at pictures, there's a picture on the cover of my book, Route 7, and it's taken from Mount Philo, which is a 980-foot little bump of a mountain south of Burlington on the Champlain Plateau. So it's looking due south at sunrise. Nothing manipulated about it. I'm looking down onto the ground, but it's a big sky, big, huge landscape. If you look at the band of light at the very horizon of that image, down at ground level, it's very cyan, very soft, light blue. And that blue in that image transitions to a very deep, dark blue like this as you get higher in the atmosphere. We don't see it because we don't walk out the door like this all day looking at the sky, right? We see everything like that. So we are always perceiving and looking at, people ask me like, how do you get that in the sky? Is that real? Yeah, because it's the part of the sky where that is real. But we don't see it. We always look at the horizon line, standing up, and we sometimes we're looking into the sun, or we're looking just at a slight angle from the sun, where you're getting a more blown out color. But if you're at either directly with the sun behind you, or from 90 degrees to that point, you're going to get much more saturation of blue in the sky the higher up you go in the atmosphere. And the more you incorporate big sky sometimes, the more deep blue you'll see. And it'll transition down into a softer, more cyan, light blue. And you can see, you can prove it to yourself that it's there. So it's there. I think that's pretty much, I wanted to say find different types of surfaces and locations like we did there to capture a reflection. And I think that's pretty much it. So, so thank you. Have fun with it, explore and have fun and go outside of your own boundaries. Just find a way to do it differently this time and next time, just shift your approach. Every day it's got to be different.
That was great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So our next part is Bruce getting his things ready. You don't need the computer; it's all printed, right?
It's all printed.
Okay. So we are trying to add a little extra to some of the meetings.
Thank you. I'm saying, I didn't ask if anyone had questions, or did anyone have anything they want to talk about before?
They were
gorgeous.
gorgeous.
Step on your toes, Bruce.
Go ahead. No, you're here first.
I said they were gorgeous. Where can we find our bridges with lights on them like around here?
That I don't.
Runs through downtown, so a lot of bridges are lit.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
With lights on them?
Yeah, they have.
Where's this?
Providence, Rhode
Oh,
Island.
Providence. Oh,
That's a
yeah.
good spot. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Boston might have some lights
Boston
on
maybe
too.
here and there. Yeah, like I'm going over to the Seaport area. There are a lot of bridges there.
They were beautiful pictures.
Do you drive around and go, there's a spot, or do you say, tomorrow at such a time I'm coming back to that?
So a little combination of both. To be totally honest, like I'm the last 3-4 years I've been really busy with client work. So I don't get out, just have time to get out in the field. I do if I book a client and I meet them before sunrise and I do the process thing with them for a few hours of teaching. But for the most part, I'm not like I don't find that I have any day where I can just wake up and say, I'm gonna go out and shoot today. Even if it's like the conditions are great, there's a clearing storm, or it's just a snowstorm. Sometimes if it snows, yes, I try to get out because the winter is a little bit less busy. But most of the creative work that I'm doing that's like spec work, right, or just my own work, things I'm not getting paid for, I'm not commissioned to do. I do when I leave, when I go away to another part of the world, because I'm free of my clients, and it's my time. And as I said, I mean, legitimately, the business is covering a significant portion of my trip, so I feel that I'm compelled to work. But I enjoy it. I love travel. Travel's the foundation of my business. I love exploring new places, so I really get into it when I go away. Like I'll get up with that one shot I told you in Lago Maggiore. I got up at 3:30 in the morning. Right, I was going 2 hours away to the Langhe, to this where Barolo wine is produced, to shoot vineyards in the morning, and I was walking down the steps of my hotel, and I looked out on the lake, and there was this moon above the lake, and I could tell the sky was that blue color. If I captured it with a long exposure, I was like, I'm stopping right now, And then I ran and got in the car. It took 10 minutes, took a few shots, got in the car, drove 100 miles away. And I was in the Langay by 6:45 in the morning, right before sunrise. But I enjoy it. My wife can just like stay in bed and sleep.
She's like, you go do your
Yeah. Just don't wake me up when you leave, okay? Everything's cool. I'll see you at lunchtime, and it works. So that's when I get most of my time to shoot these days. I just don't have a lot, and I have like. I'm working now off about a 250 to 300,000 image archive. It's crazy. I can't, if I just keep adding to it, I can't like ever do anything with it. So I'm trying to monetize the work that I've already created over the last 25 years and dig into it. And I told you, some of these images, it's the first time anyone has ever seen it outside of my office, So I want to try and find ways to just leverage all the hard work I've done for 25 years. And occasionally, I'm always driven to try and find new work and new places. But in other part of your question, sometimes, yes, sometimes it's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I see something, I think to myself, that's going to be nice at the right time of day. So I'll come back. And I do come back. And I do, if I can, get back. But then it's got to be the right conditions. It can't just be tomorrow, because tomorrow could be a crappy day, right? Yeah. So it's got to be something that I remember, or I make a Post-it note in my brain with, that on the right day, if I've got the chance, boom, that's one of these spots I'd like to go back to and try and photograph. But I have photographed this area so much. The one place I have to go to is Lake Anoda. Everyone tells me that. I've never photographed there.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah, so
Where's
I'll
this?
get there one. Anoda Lake.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. And then look at some of these pictures. They're like, is that Anoda Lake? I'm like, no, I've never gone there. Anyway, so any other questions? No? All right, well, have fun with it, okay? And we'll look forward to the judging in a month or two. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Okay.